After a rough week at sea, we finally made landfall in the Cape Verde Islands, and Santana is safely anchored in Palmeira on the northwestern side of the island Sal. Whenever you sail to a new country, you first have to check in at an international port of entry with your boat and your crew. It's basically the sailing version of walking through passport control at the airport. In the Cape Verde Islands, there's 3 main ports of entry. There's 2 in the north, one in Mindelo on São Vicente and one on the island Sal in Palmeira. And there's one further in the south on the island Santiago in the capital Praia. Since we were sailing down from the Canary Islands coming from the north, Mindelo and Palmeira were the closest 2 options. So how do we usually decide where to make our first landfall? Well, there's usually 3 categories we take into consideration. One is the current prevailing winds and swell situation. The second one is, what are our general plans for the next weeks or month? And the third one is, well, what kind of vibe are we looking for? Like, how do we want things to feel upon arrival? For the first one, we checked out Navili for the general protection score from wind and waves, and they're kind of similar. So that didn't really help us for making a decision. At least on paper, they both seemed fairly well protected from swell and winds. Well, if that's really the case, we'll find out later. For the second one, we're planning to sail in the islands for at least a month, if not a little bit longer, and we really want to check out various different islands. So since Sal is in the northeast of the archipelago and Mindelo is further to the west, and the winds are usually coming from the northeast, it makes a lot more sense to start in Sal and then move from there towards the west. So in the second category was a clear favorite for Palmeira. Now the third, there's a big gap between, or a big difference between Mindelo and Palmeira. Mindelo is like the cultural center of the Cape Verde Islands. There is music and there's nightlife, there's like hustle and bustle in the streets, there's big cruise ships arriving, there's always something going on in the city. And Palmeira, on the other hand, is a very sleepy fishing village. When I was scanning through the reviews on No Foreign Land, there was one saying, "Nothing here except an authentic fishing village." Over the time, I kind of made my own system of how to decipher reviews on those cruising apps, because obviously they're like highly subjective, highly personal opinions about places, and people have different preferences of what they like and what they don't like. And over the years, I've learned to translate that, what people write, into my own evaluation system. So when I read that, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to have when arriving in Cape Verde. Flo was tending a little bit more towards Mindelo and the wild cultural vibe there. But I think after or during the passage that was slightly rough, he then changed his mind and we decided to go to Sal. And seriously, Sal did not disappoint. When we first got to land, we could right away feel this relaxed atmosphere that people had been writing about in the reviews. You might have heard that the motto of the Cape Verde Islands is actually no stress, and I think Palmeira is a perfect example for this. The clearance procedure was extremely laid back, so laid back that they forgot to keep our boat registry, which is what they usually do until you check out again. But when they noticed upon checkout, it really wasn't a big deal. So Cabo Verde, no stress. In Palmeira, yes, very much. After a short walk through the village, we probably had seen everything that there was to see. And after 3 days, we probably were familiar with most of the residents' faces. the dogs had joined the local street dogs and street cats packs right away, and they were roaming freely through the streets because there was hardly any cars. And that for us was a big gem. We checked out a couple of the local eateries, and there was one that we particularly liked, which was an old woman making lunch, and you would usually find a lot of local people and some scruffy sailors mixed together, and she would prepare a full lunch for €3.50, which we made our go-to option for lunch most of the time because it was actually cheaper to go there than to buy groceries, because vegetables are extremely expensive on the island because it's so dry that everything has to be imported. There's another place that we really loved going to, which we called the meat bouquet place, because what's very common in Cabo Verde is that they have a grill and they throw on chicken wings and chicken drums, some chorizo and some pork on like barbecue skewers, and they prepare like a bunch of them. The place was like hustling and bustling with people coming, picking up things, people eating there, and he would just, once a couple of them were ready, he would just like wrap them up together and it looked like a flower bouquet of meat sticks. So that was one of our favorite places to go to during the night, because you could really see how the locals would flow in and out, and there's a couple of fights going on that we were witnessing as well. Nothing like aggressive or violent, but people raising their voices and like people having opinions. So that was an interesting way of watching the local lifestyle unfold. I think my favorite place was this small little Coca-Cola booth from which you could overlook the entire anchorage. It's a place where the locals gather in the evening and they play this game called Aurie. Not sure how the pronunciation goes. And I also don't know how it works. It works, they have like these little seeds that they are dividing in these little pockets, but don't ask me how it works. But it's beautiful to watch the people come there and just sit and gather and play with each other. And you usually find the occasional cruisers there as well, enjoying the fairly cheap local drinks. And if you stay long enough, you can then wander down to the fishing dock, where every night the fishermen return with a pretty impressive catch, mostly tuna for what we've seen. And there is music blasting in the background. And it's a pretty wonderful way of just watching the rhythm of life there. But if you're a sailor, you're probably interested in the anchorage situation there. And let's just say it was an adventure in itself. When we first arrived, it was blowing like in the lower 20s. And we were kind of surprised how many boats there actually are. We didn't expect that. So we decided to anchor a little bit further away from the big bulk of boats, just to find our bearings and find out what the local situation is. And the holding is pretty good there. And we saw that there's a bunch of mooring balls further in, and the boats are actually stacked pretty close to each other. And if you arrive at night, I think it's fairly safe to come in and anchor in the outer area where the boats are anchored. I wouldn't go inside at night because it's a spider web of mooring balls. We moved in a little bit further because after a couple of days there was actually some quite impressive rollers coming into the anchorage, and they were feeling a little bit too close for comfort. People started surfing in that area, so we were like, yeah, maybe we'll go in a little bit further. The anchorage is fairly protected, so you don't get any wind swell really, but it is blowing quite a bit. So we had winds most of the time between 20 and 30. And the mooring balls, well, we have watched a lot of them snap one way or another. Some just a stern line and some of them completely. So one time we had an entire boat float nearly on top of us, and it happened quite frequently. Luckily, the locals were pretty on top of catching those boats before they were drifting off on their unmanned Atlantic crossing and fixing the moorings with divers and connecting the boats again. But it is something that you want to watch out for when you're at anchor there. If you do decide to move into the big bulk of boats really close to each other, there's a couple of things to be cautious about. One of them being a big wreck in the middle of the anchorage, at least one that is pointed out in navionics. And then you will also see that there is a beautiful little free space between all the boats in the anchorage. And you might be thinking, wow, that's where I can safely drop my hook. But there is a big pipeline running on the ocean floor, so you don't want to anchor there. And the other thing is that there is a big supply cargo boat coming very frequently, and you want to make sure that you're staying out of the channel. The channel is not necessarily so visibly, because when we were there, the channel markers were not there, but during the time frame we were anchored there, they dragged them back out anyways. So you have to leave room for the boat to come in, turn around in the channel, and go out again. If you do happen to anchor too closely to the channel, the police will come and tell you to move and go somewhere really close to all the other boats. So that's another thing that makes the anchorage a bit of an adventure. Unfortunately, our dinghy, including outboard engine, disappeared from alongside our boat during one of the first nights that we were there. So that was a bit of a downer, especially because now we were left with the paddleboards, and bringing the 2 dogs to shore, having to paddle upwind with like 20 to 30 knots of wind. That was a challenge, especially because if you got blown out to sea, you're like doing an Atlantic crossing with a paddleboard and 2 dogs. So the first little stretch of getting behind the breakwater so it wouldn't blow you out to sea was always a little bit nerve-wracking. But that was another story. Despite that, we used most of our time to catch up on some office work and to just adapt to the rhythm of the islands and soak in the energy. We also did explore a little bit of the western coastline north of the anchorage, which is a place where the big waves from the Atlantic crash onto the volcanic rock, and it's a massive spectacular, and you can really hear and sense the strength of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a beautiful mix of colors. So that was something I very much enjoyed as well. One thing that caught my attention on Sal is the waste situation. Plastic waste, unfortunately, is a major challenge, and a lot of it ends up scattered in nature or blown out to the ocean. Whilst I was there, I was able to attend a local fair in Santa Maria, which is a touristy town in the south of the island. To get there, you can jump on a local transportation that's called aluguer or collectif. It's basically a minivan that just fills up with people, and once it's full, it takes you wherever it's going, and then you can shout that you want to get off, and it opens its doors and off you go. Santa Maria is very different to Palmeira. It's specifically targeted at tourists, so it has a very different vibe. There's a very pretty long white beach, and it's actually also an anchorage, but when I was there it looked extremely rolly, so we gave it a pass. And there's also a very famous kite spot close by, so if you're into that, Sal is really a place you shouldn't miss. But I wasn't there for beach time and cocktails. I was there to connect with people and talk about how to transform plastic waste into a new product and how they can possibly form a small business from that. And it was super interesting because I also met someone who had recently started a new business on Sal, pressing recyclable materials and actually shipping them off to Portugal. There's still a long way to go for the waste management sector on the island, but at least that's a pretty good start. So, is Sal a place full of sights and attractions? I would say definitely not. But it's a place with extremely friendly people, a very relaxed atmosphere, and a great way to just soak up the local way of living. And for us, that was the exact right mix for arriving in Cape Verde. And yes, losing our dinghy and the outboard engine, that was a massive bummer, but we're still very happy that we made landfall here. And next we'll be heading towards Mindelo to look if we can find some material to build ourselves a new dinghy. But more about that